2025 marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. My father Alexander Kalynuk died in 1995, 50 years after the end of World War II. Alex never shared his World War II experiences with his family. If Dad was with his fellow Army buddies, you might hear a whisper of what it is like. My first extended work stint out of town was for 4 weeks. I thought it was the end of the world. Imagine leaving your home for 5 years and heading off to war. Alex, like many other young men from the Angusville area, joined the Army early in World War II. Was it patriotism, adventure, a call to duty? No, the Army offered a paycheck at a time when there was no paying jobs around. So off to war they went. They did their service and they did it well. They gave away the innocence of their lives, a part that they would never get back. Some gave the ultimate, their lives. In this video I tell the story of Alexander's journey in World War II. The 1930s had prairie families dealing with the Great Depression. The Dirty 30s was the term for these years because of the frequent dust storms. Alexander Kalynuk was 24 half a years old at the time and living on the family farm with his parents Paul and Katie Kalynuk. The Second World War started on September 3, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland and Britain and France declared war on Germany. Canada, being a member of the British Commonwealth, declared war on Germany on September 10 to support Great Britain. During the fall and winter of 1939, the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, from the UK began landing in France, and by May 1940 the BEF amounted to 390,000 men in France. Canada began mobilizing troops in Canada during the fall of 1939 to help Britain. The opinion of the day would be that the Great British Empire along with France would easily defeat Hitler and the German Nazis long before the Canadian troops would ever make it to England and France. Alexander knew that joining the Canadian Army would give a chance to earn some money, maybe buy a farm of his own day and start a family. Alexander's older sister Nellie had married Peter Santa and was living in Port Arthur, Ontario, later renamed Thunder Bay. Nellie told Alexander that when Alexander joined the Army that he should ask at the Manning Depot that he be assigned to the Lake Superior Regiment based out of Port Arthur. The Lake Superior was a light mechanized regiment with jeeps and motorcycles and small tracked personnel carriers, and Nellie thought a mechanized unit would involve less marching for her brother because Nellie thought Alexander had flat feet, and less marching would be easier on her brother's feet. Alexander Kalynuk and Mike Katchen arrived at the Army recruiting office in Brandon, Manitoba on July 9, 1940. I'm thinking the Army recruit office would have been in the Brandon Armory building. Alexander said he wanted to join the Lake Superior Regiment. His pal, Mike Katchen, said he had no preference which unit he joined, so Mike Katchen was assigned to the Winnipeg Grenadiers. Alexander was assigned to the Lake Superiors and headed off to Port Arthur, Ontario. Mike Katchen with the Winnipeg Grenadiers was sent to defend the British colony of Hong Kong against the Japanese Army in October 1941. The British Army was defeated by Christmas 1941 and Mike Katchen was sent to Japanese POW, prisoner of war, camp. Mike was lucky to survive 4 years in the Japanese POW camp. The declaration paragraph on Alexander's Canadian Active Service Form attestation paper stated that Alexander had to serve for the entirety of the conflict or the minimum of 1 year. Alexander was probably thinking he would be done with the Army in a year and had saved a few dollars. Alexander was granted harvest leave from August 31 to September 16, 1940, and traveled by train from Port Arthur to Angusville to help out on the family farm during harvest. On October 10, 1940, the Lake Superior Regiment would travel to Camp Borden, Ontario for extensive training. October 10 was a wet day with a light drizzle falling, but the send-off at the Port Arthur train station was a warm one. Huge crowds lined the sidewalks as the troops marched down the street headed by the band dressed in scarlet tunics. They boarded the coaches to cheers along with many tears. The regiment arrived in Camp Borden shortly after noon on October 11, 1940. The troops were escorted to the new quarters, a series of tar-papered huts, bare of any furnishings. Beds, mattresses, and blankets had to be drawn from stores, and by nightfall the men were settled in. Alexander was assigned the job as driver, or better known in the British Army term as a batman. The chart below shows the organization of the regiment at the company level. The regiment was divided into 5 units: Headquarters Company, A Company, B Company, C Company, and D or Support Company. A company normally consisted of 118 enlisted men and officers, but the size at times could range from 100 to 250 men. A support company in the Canadian Army was organized as in the chart below. Platoons would be the units sent out to engage in combat. Alexander assigned to C Company and later assigned to Support Company. These photos show Alexander's Army Pay book. This booklet would be carried in the breast pocket of his Army jacket. Alexander would assign a half of his Army pay to his mother Katie each month, $15, a sizable sum when Alexander was paid $1 a day. On April 28, 1941, the regiment received orders to head for Ottawa. The purpose of the move to Ottawa was to prepare the men to function as an honor guard during the visit by the President of the United States. However, President Roosevelt was unable to make the trip to Ottawa. On May 17, 1941, Alexander received a performance review stating that the named man is a good soldier and is the desire of the commander to retain him in the company. On May 28, 1941, the regiment left Ottawa on a 5-day, 100-mile march to the train station at Vaudreuil, Quebec, just outside of Montreal. At Vaudreuil train station, the men boarded the waiting CNR railway coaches that would take them to Aldershot, Nova Scotia. The regiment arrived at Aldershot on June 5, 1941, and the regiment joined the 11th Brigade.
On June 18, 1941, the Lake Superior Regiment was sent to St. John, New Brunswick to be a part of Canada's Coastal Defence Force to guard the St. John Harbour. August 13, 1941, saw the regiment sent to Devert, Nova Scotia with other units of the 11th Brigade. February 6, 1942, saw the regiment returning to St. John, New Brunswick as a defense to guard against any German U-boat attacks within the harbor. The Winnipeg Free Press would publish this small photo of Alexander on April 11, 1942. The caption below the photo read, "Alexander Kalynuk of Angusville, Manitoba, a member of the Lake Superior Regiment, is stationed in eastern Canada, eldest son of Mr. and Mrs. Paul Kalynuk of Angusville. He enlisted in July 10, 1940. Alexander was sent on a motorcycle driver training course on April 20, 1942 and was awarded the Good Conduct Chevron badge on July 9, and qualified as a driver class 3 on July 24. Overseas. On August 20, 1942, the Canadian 4th Armoured Division, which included the Lake Superior Regiment, boarded the converted ocean liner, the HMS Strathmore, to head across the Atlantic Ocean to the United Kingdom. While at sea, the Canadian troops aboard the HMS Strathmore heard the news of the disastrous Dieppe raid, resulting in severe losses to Canadian units. On September 1, 1942, the HMS Strathmore docked at the trade wharf at Glasgow, Scotland, and the regiment disembarked and boarded the train that would take them to Farnham Station, located 60 kilometers southwest of London. At Farnham, the troops were housed in metal Quonset huts. Now that the Lake Superior Regiment was stationed in the UK, daily combat training would begin. Performance reviews were done in November 1942, and Alex's review states that this soldier is a splendid-looking type. People who are Polish-Ukrainian talk with an accent, is cheerful, willing, intelligent-looking. Is employed as a batman and is satisfied in the regiment and happy in his work. Believe he is well-placed and services are satisfactory. The Lake Superior Regiment was in the 4th Armoured Brigade of the 4th Canadian Armoured Division. The 4th Armoured Brigade consisted of the Lake Superior Regiment with Bren gun carriers, the 21st Canadian Armoured Regiment Governor-General's Foot Guards with Sherman and Firefly tanks, the 22nd Canadian Armoured Regiment Canadian Grenadier Guards with Sherman and Firefly tanks, and the 28th Canadian Armoured Regiment British Columbia Regiment with Sherman and Firefly tanks. Alexander Kalynuk would continue as a driver batman and was assigned to Lieutenants Malak and Proves and Support Company in February 1943. A support company and an infantry unit was an afterthought of the British Army after 2 years of unsuccessful fighting in the desert. In these campaigns, the infantry officers kept requesting heavier close support. In the fall of 1942, what we know as Support Company was added to the strength of an infantry battalion. It contained, in miniature, a replica of all arms, mortars and anti-tank to represent artillery, carriers to represent armored cars. Later, Browning machine guns were added to give tremendous firepower to cover off the engineers. Flamethrowers were added and did terrible damage. Each support company platoon was made completely self-supporting and self-contained for ammunition and rations. After training in the UK for almost 2 years, by the spring of 1944, the invasion of France was on everyone's mind. D-Day, the Allied invasion of Europe, began on June 6, 1944. The 4th Canadian Armoured Division, of which the Lake Superior Regiment was a part of, did not go ashore on D-Day, but was held back in reserve. In the early morning hours of July 19, 1944, the Lake Superior Regiment broke camp and headed to the docks at Tilbury, located southeast of London on the Thames River. At Tilbury, the regiment boarded 3 ships, the Houston City, the Fort Ray, and the Fort Assiniboine, for the trip across the English Channel. On July 26, the Lake Superior Regiment landed on Juno Beach at Normandy, France. The first combat action for the Lake Superior Regiment was on August 4, 1944, when the regiment attacked the German army at La Hogue. The attack failed and the LSRs regrouped. On August 8, the regiment within the Canadian 4th Armoured Division took part in the battle for the Falaise Pocket or the Falaise Gap. The German army was surrounded at Falaise and had to retreat eastward via a small corridor. A large portion of the German army based in Normandy was killed. The lone road out of Falaise for the German army retreat was called the Corridor of Death. The Falaise battle is considered one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. Google the Battle of Falaise Gap for more information on this historic battle.
The Second Front burst onto the beaches of France, D-Day, June 6, 1944. The Lake Superiors, however, did not play a part in this invasion.
We were not part of the D-Day landing troops, and we were scheduled for the breakthrough. And we went from Courcelles is where we landed, and by this time Caen had been taken, and the regiment moved and had its first taste of blood just a little bit south of Caen, and it was a shock to the system of airway to find out that the bullets were for real, people were being killed, people were being wounded, and it became a harsh reality of life.
Late in July, the 4th Armored relieved units of Monty's famed Desert Rats at Ypres and Solier. The LSRs were part of the advance south from Caen to close the Falaise Pocket. Lieutenant Colonel Burrell was wounded. Command of the regiment passed to Lieutenant Colonel Robert A. Keane. Renewed effort to cut off the German retreat. The Lake Supes came to the assistance of a Polish regiment.
Oh yeah, we got them out of a mess there one time. They were completely surrounded. And I think we went in the British Columbia Regiment, a C Company, and on the other part of the regiment, of course, and some tanks from the Grenadiers. Yeah, but we had to get them out of that mess, all right. They were very pleased to see us as well.
After Falaise was taken, when the German army was surrounded, we went through 14 miles of the worst carnage, destruction and death that could possibly be seen anywhere, which was the most terrible part of war.
The bond of trust with the tanks of the brigade, the Governor General's Foot Guards, the Canadian Grenadier Guards, and the British Columbia Regiment was solidified in these actions.
They wanted us to wear their crests on our vehicles, and wherever we went with these people, they were always calling for their lake soups for these guys and on foot and so on, that would give them such wonderful protection and would in fact lay down their lives for them, and they did.
After the Falaise battle, the regiment would turn north and fight through northern France, arriving in Bergues, Belgium on September 10th. Added to his duties as a batman, Alexander was tasked as a messenger, delivering dispatches via a motorcycle. The photo shows what a typical Canadian Army motorcycle rider would look like. The Lake Superior Regiment entered Holland in October 1944 and reaches the Maas River by December. The regiment was thinking about Christmas celebrations. Then on December 20th, the regiment abruptly received orders to move out to Hertogenbosch at once. The German army launched a major offensive into the Ardennes forest in Belgium against the American army with the purpose of the Germans capturing the Belgian port of Antwerp. This famous failed German offensive was called the Battle of the Bulge. The Lake Superior Regiment moved to Hertogenbosch to shore up the Allied position should the German army break out of the Ardennes forest. Christmas Day 1944 was quiet for the regiment, with a few men on watch duty. Christmas dinner featured roast turkey and roast beef. A few local Dutch chickens were thrown in to supplement the turkey. Dessert consisted of pudding, mince tarts, cakes, and a bottle of English beer. Each man received a Christmas parcel donated by the Knights of Columbus. The parcel contained cigarettes, cigars, matches and chocolate bars. New Year's Day brought little in the way of change from the familiar routine of patrols. The routine of daily patrols would continue until late February. On February 25th, the regiment was ordered to move toward a clearing through the Hochwald Forest, the clearing known as the Hochwald Gap. The German army put up fierce resistance. This battle was named the Battle of the Hochwald Gap. After the fighting at the Hochwald Gap, the Lake Superior Regiment was given 3 days' rest. On March 6 saw the regiment advance and capture the town of Wennenthal near Wesel, Germany. March 12, 1945, would see the regiment relieved and sent to Oerschot, Holland for rest and recuperation. April 2 would see the regiment return to combat, clearing the German army from the towns of Terborg, Borculo, Gelselar, Diepenheim, and Coevorden. The regiment continued moving north, fighting along the Kussen Canal, and arriving at the German town of Bad Zweiskenen on April 30. The fighting was severe as the German troops realized this was their last stand before their fatherland was overrun. A German priest was sent into the town of Bad Zweiskenen to convince the German defenders to surrender. If the German troops did not vacate, the town would be bombed or shelled to rubble. The German soldiers chose to vacate the town of Bad Zweiskenen. On May 2, 1945, the regiment was ordered to take Oldenburg. By May 3, 1945, rumors of peace were in the air and more German soldiers began surrendering without a fight. On the evening of May 4, the message came from headquarters that all forward movements by the Allied troops would cease. This is how the war ended for the Lake Superior Regiment and Alexander Kalynuk. Germany unconditionally surrendered on May 7, 1945, and May 8 was declared victory in Europe VE Day. On May 8, the regiment then moved to Varel, Germany and to begin rounding up German troops into prisoner of war camps. On May 25, the regiment was ordered to Hengelo, Holland, a welcome move as the Dutch people warmly welcomed the Canadian troops. This photo of Alexander was taken at a portrait studio in Amsterdam in 1945. On June 17, the Lake Superior Regiment held a religious service to pay formal tribute to their fellow soldiers that were killed in action. A regiment sports day was planned for July 1, 1945 to celebrate Canada's birthday, but the day was rained out. Some Lake Superior soldiers assisted local Dutch farmers during the haying and harvest season. I think Alexander would have been one. In mid-September, the Lake Superior Regiment moved to Soest, Holland near the Canadian Army repatriation camp located at Nijmegen. Lake Superior Regiment troops would start the return trip to Canada. Alexander arrived in Halifax, Nova Scotia on October 22, 1945, and took the train to Winnipeg. Disembarkation leave was granted until December 7. Alexander was discharged from the Canadian Army on December 12, 1945. His total Canadian Army service was 65 months, of which 38 months were overseas. Shown is Alex's Army discharge certificate and his personnel report that this man is very interested in farming. An Army form was filled out for his award medals to be sent home to Angusville. Alexander received 5 Canadian Army medals. They are the 1939-1945 Star, the France and Germany Service Star, the Defense Medal, the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal and the 1939-1945 War Medal. The community of Angusville would formally welcome the veterans home with a reception at Angusville Hall on May 28, 1946. Postscript. My father Alexander Kalynuk rarely talked about the war. The only times I can recall a war story being told was when he was in the company of someone from his regiment, and those stories were of funny incidents that had happened to them, like boiling the officers' soup dry while they were playing cards instead of monitoring the soup pot, and then they quickly adding dishwater to the soup to make it liquid as the officers arrived early for lunch. Combat memories for Alexander were sealed away and never purposely revisited or talked about. Alexander often retold the story of how his sister Nellie Santa insisted that he join the Lake Superior Regiment as she felt that there would be less marching for Alex. Alex felt that this was a lucky break as he did not enter the combat zone until July 26, 1944. In later years, Alexander proudly served in the Legion Honor Guard on each November 11 Remembrance Day service. What were Alexander's thoughts on Remembrance Day, only God knows. Maybe remembering his fellow soldiers that died on the battlefield and him being eternally grateful that God spared his life. Alexander died from congestive heart failure on May 5, 1995, at the age of 79, survived by his wife Lena, daughters Marianne, Janice, and Donna, and son Kenneth. His grave marker was inscribed, "Lord, thank you for a beautiful life." I suppose after the horror of World War II, Alexander saw the remainder of his life as beautiful, fortunate that he survived the war. One last item to share. There was a small storage closet on the second floor of our two-story farmhouse in which my mom stored old clothes and a World War II German Nazi flag, Dad's souvenir from the war. Dad said he had packed many souvenirs to bring home from the war, including a German Luger pistol and German medals. The day before their ship got to Halifax, an announcement came over the ship's PA system, stating anyone bringing weapon or war souvenirs into Canada would have their duty extended, thus most threw their souvenirs overboard. Only the Nazi flag and a wooden Dutch shoe made it home with Alexander. As kids, we would play in that storage closet and at times peek in the bag that had the Nazi flag. When I was in grade 2 in 1962 at the St. Mary's Country School, Santa needed a toy bag to go with his costume at the school's Christmas concert. Mom got the Nazi flag from the closet. The red material was cut into sections and sewed into a Santa's toy bag. The other flag pieces were thrown in the garbage. That was the end of Dad's Nazi flag, and that brings this story to a close. Thank you for watching.